White Boy Rick, the 17-year-old Detroit kid who went to prison on a drug charge and never got out. Tonight, he's speaking out from behind prison walls.
But all I did was what I was asked, and all I did was tell the truth.
Hollywood is making a movie about his life. Musician Kid Rock has fought for his freedom. But 26 years after his arrest, Rick Wershe, a.k.a. White Boy Rick, is still behind bars. Now, in his own words, he tells us why. Rick Wershe has been locked up for decades, the parole board refusing to let him out, while at the same time other criminals who committed worse crimes have been set free.
Yeah, in fact, Wershe has served more prison time than any juvenile offender in Michigan history. Defender Kevin Dietz went to the prison where he's been serving his time and sat down face-to-face for a conversation with White Boy Rick. Kevin?
Well, Rick Wershe is not a scary individual. He's smart and he's well-read. And he tells me that the feds promised to let him out of jail early if he would help them bring down dirty cops. And then he says they broke that promise. This is Rick Wershe 26 years ago, a skinny kid with moppy hair, a 17-year-old boy arrested for selling 8 kilos of cocaine. The media gave him the nickname White Boy Rick, and it stuck. A judge sent him to prison for life without parole, and while in prison, he was convicted of participating in a stolen car ring from behind bars. Wershe told Local 4 way back in 1990 that he made mistakes, but was willing to make up for it by turning in some of Detroit's most powerful people.
7 or 10 police, that's nothing. The corruption runs so deep in there, it's a shame, man.
Nearly 10,000 days have passed since Wershe was first locked up. The Michigan Constitution no longer allows life sentences without parole for minors arrested on drug charges. But Rick Wershe is still here. He's now a 45-year-old man. 26 long years have passed. It's unheard of for nonviolent juvenile offenders. Even more bizarre because Rick Wershe has cooperated with police.
He provided information that resulted in the conviction of a lot of corrupt police officers.
Greg Schwartz was the FBI agent who turned Wershe's information into new arrests. He says Wershe should have been thanked by the Michigan Parole Board and released from prison years ago.
What do you got against a kid who was 17 years old, who now has spent half of his life behind bars?
To find out more, I drove to a prison in northern Michigan, where I sat for hours with the drug dealer known as White Boy Rick. Cameras were not allowed inside.
Should have got the key to the city of Detroit. Anyone that looks from the outside in, Kevin, they're like, wait a minute, something's wrong.
When you're talking to Wershe, he doesn't sound paranoid. It's more he's confused. He can't figure out what it is that's keeping him locked up for so long.
The government's convincing me that, oh, we're going to do everything for you, we're going to help you, you don't know how much this means to us, we couldn't have done this without you.
Wershe tells me the same parole board that has released dozens of rapists, murderers, and drug lords refuses to let him out because he helped police go after powerful people.
I embarrassed a lot of people, but all I did was what I was asked, and all I did was tell the truth.
In an attempt to shorten his prison time, Wershe gave the FBI information that led to the arrest of family and friends of Coleman A. Young, the former mayor's favorite bodyguard Jimmy Harris, his brother-in-law Willie Volson, and niece Kathy Volson Curry were all arrested as a result of Wershe's cooperation.
He was extremely upset at me for, I believe he called me a stool pigeon for turning in corrupt cops. I thought any mayor would love to have corrupt cops off of their force, but to Coleman Young, I was a stool pigeon.
Wershe also provided information on one of Detroit's most popular cops, Gil Hill, a homicide boss who appeared in the Eddie Murphy movie Beverly Hills Cop.
I don't want to see any more of these blue slips. We're not going to see some arrest slips.
Wershe said he heard a phone conversation where a drug dealer responsible for the shooting death of a 12-year-old kid called Gil Hill asking for help.
Basically, Gil told him everything that was going on, and that he had it under control and that he would be in touch, not to worry about anything.
Gil Hill was investigated but never charged. Hill publicly called Wershe a liar.
I think there's no doubt that it's related to my cooperation about Gil Hill and about police corruption
Wershe was also helping the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office. Mike Duggan, who is now mayor, was prosecutor at the time. Mike Cox, who went on to become Attorney General, was assigned to find out what Wershe knew about the same murder Gil Hill was accused of covering up.
I spoke to Mr. Cox 3 or 4 times at length about the murder. I explained everything to him.
Wershe was not given a medal for cooperating with police, and when he got his one and only parole hearing in 2003, the promises made to help him get out of prison were broken. Wayne County Prosecutor Mike Duggan wrote a scathing letter recommending parole be denied, and then U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Collins rescinded the office's recommendation for release.
Everybody told me I had nothing to worry about, that I cooperated, that, no one would oppose my release, and then all at once, all had something bad to say about me.
The parole board denied his release, and for 11 straight years has refused to give him any additional hearings.
There's someone or something that's keeping me in prison, and it's not the crime that I committed.
Wershe's attorney wants an investigation into the parole board and is asking the federal courts to intervene.
I don't know who would still want him in. To me, that's the million-dollar question.
And we obtained this sworn affidavit from one of the law enforcement officials who testified against Wershe. Now, under oath, he says that he didn't know anything about Wershe's case, but his bosses ordered him to tell the parole board that Wershe was far too dangerous to let back out onto the streets. We also heard from the office of Mayor Mike Duggan, and his spokesperson says, quote, the mayor never made any, he says, we never made any promises to him. The letter sent reflects his position. We also heard from former Attorney General Mike Cox, who says, given the change in the law, his age when convicted, and the 26 years he has served, I don't see the point of keeping him locked up any longer, unless he has been a discipline problem in prison. That being said, he is delusional about any promises or providing any information to me. We also talked to Jeffrey Collins, the U.S. Attorney at the time. He says he can barely remember the case, but he's going to look into it and get back to us, and we were unable to contact Gil Hill for a comment. Devin, Carmen?
All right, certainly a name that we haven't heard of in quite some time, and 46 years old. He spent a lot of time behind bars. Thank you, Kevin.
Fascinating stuff. All right, Kevin. At 17, police called him a drug kingpin, sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. But there is much more to the story of White Boy Rick.
I was asked to go out there and get information about some people that were involved in the drug trade and their connections and how the drugs were coming in. They wanted as much information as I could on a drug organization in Detroit.
Yeah, the man that we once knew as White Boy Rick says it was police who first got him involved in the drug game, and that they even flew him out to Las Vegas to hang out with drug dealers.
Defender Kevin Dietz has the second part of his exclusive jailhouse interview with White Boy Rick.
Rick Wershe had a very unusual job for a 14-year-old kid. Police were paying him to get close to drug dealers and then tell them when shipments were coming in. It was a job that led Wershe to sell drugs eventually and landed him in prison for more than 27 years. Before Rick Wershe was arrested by the cops, he was working for the cops. He was only 14 years old, a freshman in high school. His father, who was also a paid informant, gave permission.
They showed me some pictures and asked me who this person was, who that person was. I basically identified them, and they said they would be in touch.
To hear his story, I drove 4 hours to sit face-to-face with the drug dealer known as White Boy Rick. Cameras were not allowed inside the prison.
The relationship grew from there. It went into them sending me into houses to purchase drugs and stuff like that.
Soon, Wershe was collecting hundreds and eventually thousands of dollars to cozy up to criminals and help police bust them.
I was asked to go out there and get information about some people that were involved in the drug trade and their connections and how the drugs were coming in.
These documents obtained by the defenders support Wershe's story. They show numerous payoffs for information.
Over the course of 2 years, I would say probably somewhere around $30,000 maybe.
He wasn't even old enough to drive, but was already buying cars with money given to him by law enforcement. Wershe was getting paid. Police were making arrests. Everything was working out until at age 15, Rick Wershe was shot by a suspicious drug dealer.
I was shot and I never went back to school. I started the 9th grade, and when I got shot, I never went back.
I don't use the word tragedy or injustice lightly, but I use it emphatically when I'm talking about Rick Wershe.
Scott Bernstein is an author and a true crime historian. He has researched the Wershe case for years. He says what police did is unconscionable.
This is the prostituting of our youth and then just throwing them in a cage and throwing the key away.
After the shooting, police stayed away for a while, but within a few months, they were back. And this time, they had an elaborate plan, a road trip to Las Vegas.
It was a Hearns-Hagler boxing match, and they wanted as much information as I could on a drug organization in Detroit.
Detroit boxing sensation Tommy Hearns was to fight Marvin Hagler in a match the entire sports world was buzzing about. Big-time drug dealers were going to attend, and the feds wanted the 15-year-old Wershe to be right in the middle of it.
The government is the one that provided me with the fake ID.
The task force thought sending Rick there with a fake ID and some cash would really raise the ante on the operation they were conducting.
These reports document payment for the flight, the room, and walking around spending money. The investment paid off. Wershe's information led to a bust of a major local drug operation. Then, police suddenly stopped coming around.
They turned their back on me. I was a 17-year-old kid. I was addicted to the money.
His drug dealing days lasted 1 short year. He was busted and convicted of having 8 kilos of cocaine. He was sentenced to life in prison. Police called him a drug kingpin, and he was tagged with the nickname White Boy Rick.
I think that the reputation far exceeds the actual person that is Rick Wershe and what exactly he was doing during that time period.
He was eligible for parole more than a decade ago, but the parole board refuses to give him a hearing. Arrested at age 17, he is now a 46-year-old man.
I think it's a true tragedy and something that, an injustice that needs to be, a wrong that needs to be righted.
They got me involved in this, and I was a kid. I made a poor decision. Should I be paying for it 27 years later? I don't think so.
As our series continues, we'll introduce you to the parole board that is keeping Wershe locked up. And you'll meet one former member who says it's dead wrong to keep Wershe in when killers and rapists are being let out. You can see our entire series on the Defenders page at clickondetroit.com. Kevin Dietz, Defenders.
It's interesting. Murderers and rapists have served less time than the man that we've come to know as White Boy Rick.
And tonight, Defender Kevin Dietz sits down with a former member of the Michigan Parole Board to find out why Rick Wershe may never win freedom.
If you're a prisoner, the Michigan Parole Board is very powerful. They decide who stays in and who gets out. Tonight, a retired parole board member is breaking his silence about the White Boy Rick case. White Boy Rick is no angel. As a 17-year-old kid, he sold a lot of cocaine. It was the 1980s, a time when crack cocaine was brutalizing inner cities like Detroit. And while Rick Wershe was locked up in prison, he was convicted as a minor player in a stolen car ring. In an interview inside the prison where he's serving time, Wershe admitted his crimes.
I was stupid. I regret every day. Now, as a 45-year-old, do I look at what drugs do and it's overwhelming and the people dying from it? Yeah, I'm remorseful.
The parole board routinely releases criminals arrested for carjackings, drive-by shootings, attempted murders, and other violent crimes after 10 to 15 years. But not White Boy Rick. He has been locked up for a record-breaking 27 years. He watches violent criminals he's locked up with come and go.
They stab people in prison and commit violent acts in prison, catch another case in prison, and they're paroled. Why am I so different?
To find out why, we went to Robert Aguirre, a retired police officer who also served on the parole board. The problem is, he can't figure out why violent offenders are getting out of prison and Wershe isn't.
I've released people who were armed robbers, some who had committed a murder. So why not him? And that's a great question. I don't know.
He says the single drug charge and a single car theft case are classified as nonviolent crimes. Aguirre says keeping Wershe locked up is cruel and unusual punishment.
I voted to have Rick Wershe released. It made sense. There was no reason in this world that he should still be there.
There are currently 10 members on the parole board. We went to a public hearing and were told cameras are not allowed inside. The members are appointed and paid close to $100,000 a year. In 2003, the board denied parole after Wershe's one and only hearing. In 2010, Robert Aguirre insisted on another vote.
The board voted not to allow him to have another public hearing.
In 2012, board member Barbara Sampson reviewed the file again and refused to give Wershe a hearing, saying they would take another look in 2017. So Wershe sits and sits longer than any nonviolent offender locked up as a juvenile in Michigan history. The cost to taxpayers, approximately $800,000.
Murderers are out 15, 16, 17 years. He's been there for 27 years.
Attorney Ralph Musilli is more than a little suspicious. He says Wershe was a teenage informant who at just 14 years old was paid by police to inform on local drug dealers. Then, while in prison, he gave federal agents information that led to the arrests of more than a dozen people, including former Detroit Mayor Coleman Young's niece, brother-in-law, and bodyguard. He feels the parole board has red-flagged Wershe's release because he helped take down powerful people.
My impression is that they were never really going to let him out.
Greg Schwartz is one of the FBI agents Wershe gave tips to. He says every dangerous criminal Wershe helped put away has been released from prison. He is begging the parole board to do the right thing.
The only individual who's still sitting behind bars is Rick Wershe, because he was the source, and for some reason that parole board up there, they don't like that.
I sat with Wershe for hours inside this prison. He tells me he did the crimes, but he has more than done his time. He just wants to go home.
I think it's going to take something from the governor. I don't think the Michigan Parole Board will ever give me a fair shake.
Governor Jennifer Granholm said no to Wershe's request when she left office. Governor Snyder has the power to act, but has not. And the state attorney general is actively fighting Wershe's request to get a new parole hearing. Now, when our series continues, you'll hear from Rick Wershe's mother and his daughter, and you'll see why legendary rock musician Kid Rock is trying to help get White Boy Rick out of prison. Kevin Dietz, Defenders.
But we begin this afternoon with breaking news. A key hearing has been set for this Friday that, after 28 years behind bars, could signal the release of White Boy Rick.
Boy, the story has been in the news for a long time. It is certainly controversial. Rick Wershe, who has spent more time behind bars than any nonviolent juvenile offender in Michigan history. But now there's a renewed push to get him released, and it has really picked up pace.
That it has. Defender Kevin Dietz joins us live now. And Kevin, Wershe will be here in Detroit for Friday's hearing, and you talked to him today. What did he have to say?
I did. Rick Wershe was absolutely in tears today on the phone when I talked with him. He cannot believe after all this time, 28 years, that a judge is finally going to hold a hearing where lawyers can come into court and argue that he should be released after serving all this time behind bars. Now, Wershe was arrested at the age of 17, and he's been serving in prison all this time, longer than any other nonviolent juvenile offender in the history of Michigan. He says he should be sentenced, resentenced, and let out for time served, but it will not come without a fight. The prosecutor's office says Rick Wershe is where he is supposed to be, and that's where they want him to stay. Getting Rick Wershe to Detroit will be no easy task. It is well known that he has cooperated with law enforcement and put many people behind bars. He has put dirty cops behind bars. He has put a member of the mafia behind bars. He is going to be under very heavy security when he comes to Detroit for Friday's hearing. Take a look. Not so fast. That's what prosecutor Kim Worthy is saying about Rick Wershe's hopes of getting out of prison soon. The teenage drug dealer nicknamed White Boy Rick was busted at age 17 and has served 28 years behind bars, the longest ever in Michigan for a nonviolent juvenile. The prosecutor's court filing saying Wershe was moving kilos of cocaine and was sentenced according to the law. While not surprising, it is upsetting to Wershe, who I talked to from behind bars today.
I just don't
don't understand why she would fight for me to stay in prison for something I did as a juvenile. I cooperated with her office. I cooperated with federal authorities.
We asked Local 4 legal expert Neil Rock on what he thought of Wershe's plea to get resentenced and released for time served.
It's absolutely preposterous and absurd, and in a lot of ways shocks the conscience that somebody can be in prison under old rules that we have decided are so bad and so unacceptable that we've changed the law, where the Supreme Court and other courts have said that the things that we were doing are so wrong that we revisited all of them. But we're going to keep this guy locked up.
Worthy's motion points out each argument made by Wershe and counters that the law was followed. Rockine says the goal should be to see that justice is served.
I mean, it's never too late to do the right thing. And the right thing is that Wershe should be released. Period. End of story.
Man, I can't thank you enough for believing in me and everything you done, kiddo.
So here's how it's going to work. Wershe is going to be brought from the prison cell where he is now in northern Michigan down to the Wayne County Jail. Then on Friday morning, everyone will be in Judge Dana Hathaway's courtroom. The prosecutors will argue that he should not be resentenced because the law was followed. Wershe's attorneys will argue that he should be resentenced. But the judge has already indicated that she doesn't need oral arguments. She's just going to read the written motions. So Friday morning when everyone gets there, Judge Dana Hathaway is expected to just give her ruling on whether or not Rick Wershe will be resentenced or not. Reporting live in Detroit, Kevin Dietz, Defenders.
Now on to white boy Rick, who will not be getting out of jail anytime soon. There were some signs for Wershe, this man who has spent more time behind bars than any other juvenile offender in Michigan history, that he would be getting out of jail soon.
Yeah, but just hours ago, the Court of Appeals dashed his hopes. Kevin, you talked to Wershe right after that ruling came down. What is he saying about this?
Yeah, he's really emotional, and here's the ruling right here from the Court of Appeals. It basically says that Rick Wershe will not be getting resentenced in this case. Wershe wanted to be resentenced as an individual. Prosecutors argued that when the law changed saying juveniles cannot be held on life without parole, that Wershe automatically reverted to a life with parole sentence and should only get out of prison when the parole board approves that release. So Wershe's original sentence stands as is, and he will not be resentenced unless the Supreme Court changes the course of action once again. Wershe says he will appeal to the Supreme Court, and he says he is very grateful to Judge Dana Hathaway for sticking up for his right to be resentenced. Listen to this.
I couldn't thank her enough for looking at it and what she did, and she had the courage to stand up and say this is wrong. Oh, I'm disappointed. I mean, let down a little bit, but I expected it, to be honest with you. After all this time in here, you don't believe you're going to get out of here until the day you walk out of here. I'll keep fighting till my dying breath, because they've never taken into the account that I was a juvenile, and law enforcement got me involved in it.
What he's talking about there is at age 14, Wershe was actually paid by police officers and the FBI to be an informant against drug dealers on the east side of Detroit. But at age 16, Wershe started selling drugs by himself illegally, and he was busted at age 17. He went to jail where he's been for 28 years. Wershe feels that he should be resentenced or let out because he cooperated with police before he became a drug dealer and after he became a drug dealer, and that he feels that he has served more time, in fact has served more time than any other juvenile in the history of Michigan. So as it stands right now, Rick Wershe will not be resentenced. Kevin Dietz, Defenders.